The Unmarked by Matt Fleagle. Chapter 15. The Flying Beast. Several of Ablaren's towers had been reduced to rubble. There were even blocks of ornate stones used to enclose the high-rising ramparts of the city, piled up in fragments along the edge of the street. Looking up, Kaleb saw that several of the city's towers had been torn clear off of their heavy stone supports. Shielding his eyes from the bright morning sun, Kaleb could just barely make out something slender, massive, and gold gliding over the skyline of the stone city. No one in his party seemed to know what it was. As the party of animals and humans reached the end of the alley, they saw stone renders in the streets, screaming to each other for help, or calling out warnings. Women, men, and children, dressed in the flowing black garments Kaleb had seen them wearing earlier, could be seen taking cover behind wooden carts or under open doorways. They kept pointing upward. The chaos in the streets worked to the fugitives' advantage. The citizens of Ablaren scampered about in such hysteria that they failed to notice the motley party of Stonerender scouts and beasts quietly edging their way out onto the main road that coursed through Ablaren. Signaling for them to follow him, Freylin led his 5 companions down 2 winding streets, then into a narrow alcove under the south edge of what appeared to be a large event hall. Here, they froze in their tracks at another terrifying shriek out of the sky again, now ear-splittingly loud above ground. They all looked up. A flying orange creature, lithe but powerful, tore through the cloudy sky directly above them. "Is that what I think it is?" Kaleb gasped. "Come on," shouted Freylin. "Right now that flying thing is our best cover for an escape. There is no time to waste. Let's get out of the city while the people's attention is divided." "No," said Glista. "We must find my mother and recover the sacred branch. That was our mission." Freylin turned to face her. He laid his strong hand on her shoulder. "Young woman," he said calmly, "I know you are brave, and like an honorable scout you would rather die than forego a noble errand, but these companions of yours are frightened and exhausted. Look at the bear. His legs are still quivering from your mother's attack. Madge is terrified. The Dellblood is weary. If the wolf is spotted, our people will hunt her through the streets. Now, in these frantic moments, we have an opportunity to escape, and perhaps, with a little luck, get them to safety." "But she must be stopped," Glista protested. "She will be stopped," Kaleb said, breaking in. "But Freylin is right. We have to get these beasts to a safe place, somewhere outside this hostile city. And Madge is not prepared to fight. If your people capture her, they will try her with you as a traitor, and likely as not, will put her to death." Glista glanced over at Madge. The Dellblood's beautiful eyes were wide with terror. Kaleb saw a trace of resentment in Glista's face. She looked away from Madge and spat on the ground. "Glista, please," Kaleb continued. "I beg you, we must go." Glista slid her sword back into its sheath and, after a loud sigh, nodded to Freylin. "I will take the front," Freylin said. "Glista, you cover the tail end. If anyone seeks to question or pursue us, flash your blade, but do not harm them unless absolutely necessary. Enough blood has been shed this day." Having settled this point, the 6 of them scrambled down several more disorienting stairways and steep alleys, with Freylin in the lead. "Have you ever seen one of those flying creatures, Teva?" Kaleb shouted to the wolf as they ran through the uneven city streets. "Never," said the wolf. "But it is a dragon, yes," snorted Grimwit. He had just lumbered up beside them. "It certainly looks like one, at least from the stories I've heard." "You mean you didn't know dragons existed?" Kaleb asked. "Not until now," Grimwit said. Valrinkle made mention of them in stories of the old world, but before the sacred tree and the division of beasts and men, I thought they had vanished from our lands long ago." Their conversation was interrupted just then, for Freylin held up his hand to signal them to stop, followed by a motion for them to be quiet. Then he waved for them to stay close behind him as he plodded forward at a more cautious pace. The whole party pulled up close to a wall at the edge of an alley which opened out onto a broad street. On their way through the city, Freylin's familiarity with less traveled quarters of Ablerin had come in handy. The escape party had only encountered 4 or 5 stone renders, by Kaleb's count, along their circuitous route through the city. Furthermore, the few stone renders they encountered were frantically seeking shelter or assistance. Except for a few curious children who clapped their hands over their open mouths at the sight of Teva and Grimwit, the civilians all but ignored the strange group making their way through Ablerin. Suddenly, Freylin looked concerned, however. He kept glancing around the corner of the wall and then shaking his head. The old scout bit his lip before turning back toward the escape party. "What is it?" said Kaleb. "I can see the west gate from here. That's our quickest way out of the city." "Then why do you look alarmed?" "The gate is more heavily guarded than I anticipated. Verliston must have had the presence of mind to assign extra scouts to the city exits, on the slight chance that we escaped her underground chamber. Her guards are no doubt anticipating us." "How do you know they're expecting us?" Kaleb asked. "I count 9 Stonerender scouts posted in front of the west gate. That is 3 times the regular detail assigned to the gate. It is always the least guarded of our entrances to the city. That's why I brought us this way." "Is Verliston out there?" Glista said. Freylin shook his head. "Thankfully, no." "Could we fight our way out?" growled Grimwit. "I feel my strength returning. I would be glad to fall upon 2 of those pests at once, even if I ended up with one of their little swords in my side." Freylin grinned. "My furry comrade, I admire your courage, but I fear that even if you took 2 or even 3 of them to yourself, we wouldn't stand a chance. Kaleb's inexperience with a weapon, my age, and the wolf's size would severely limit our chances of defeating this detachment of scouts." "What about waiting until night?" said Glista. Freylin frowned. "I thought of that, but by then Verliston and the rest of the city elders will know for certain you have escaped. She will concoct a story about your treachery and get them all looking for you at once, probably with others ordered to kill you on sight. We have to make our move now, or never." "Are there no other gates near this end of the city?" said Kaleb. Glista and Freylin exchanged grim looks. "No, this is it," Freylin said. "Then we must fight," said Kaleb, revolving the blood-stained axe in his hands slowly. "I know little of shedding blood or of the art of combat, but I would at this moment risk my life and engage these scouts in battle if it might get you all clear of danger." Teva pressed her furry black head against Kaleb's open hand. "Count me with you," she said. "I will not leave your side until these enemies are behind us. Anyone who raises his sword against you will have my fangs and paws to deal with." Kaleb nodded. "Thank you, Teva." Grimwit suddenly cleared his large bare throat with a noise that startled them all. "That goes for me too, Dellblood," he muttered in as gentle a voice as he could manage. "You risked your life to free me from that wretched cage. If we are to meet our death this day, I will leave this world clawing at anyone who attempts to take your life." "Well then, a forward attack it is," Glista said, a wry smile on her tired face. "Freylin, are you still opposed to shedding Stonerender blood?" Freylin looked at each of their faces in turn and nodded slowly. Placing his hand on the hilt of his weapon, he replied, "I never thought I would have to take up my sword against the very scouts I once trained, but today is a dark and confused day in Ablerin." Freylin lowered his sword and approached Madge. Running his calloused fingers along a frayed end of her scalped hair, he said, "Before I race into battle with our opponents, Madge, I want you to know something. I want you to know that, to me, you are the most beautiful creature in this cold, cruel world." Madge looked up at him with confusion. Freyland continued with a tremor in his voice. "You have known for some time that you are not the daughter of a Dellblood man. Your mother told you this, I expect." At this she nodded. "How do you know of this? Have you met my true father?" "For your safety," Freyland said, "and for your mother's, I never visited you in the deep woods of Aberon when you came to see your mother. I feared—" He paused. Something choked Freyland's voice again, and Madge's brown eyes filled up with large tears. "Certainly this is not the way, nor the sort of place I ever pictured introducing myself to my daughter." Madge covered her mouth with her hands as she stared at him. "The forest spirit has not forgotten me, child. He was kind enough to let me see you, fine and virtuous and beautiful as a grown woman, before I passed into the next life. Before old age had weakened my sight or my mind, it is the richest joy I could ever hope for. I only hope, child, that you are old enough to understand and to perhaps forgive that I, Freyland Stonerender, am the father which you never met." Madge swallowed hard and stood still for several moments. Then she reached out with shaking hands and stroked the edge of his face. "Your eyes and the lines of your jaw," she said. "They are so much like mine. I didn't notice it until now," she said, smiling. Freyland took the girl's hands into his and pulled her closer to his black uniform. "It is my blood that turned your blue eyes brown and straightened the lines in your perfect jaw, my child. You are certainly mine. And somehow, by the protection of the forest spirit, I can only assume your people came to overlook these foreign features in your face as a mystery beyond solving." He stood back from her for a moment and looked at her gravely. "And so," continued Freyland, "though I would give 1,000 men's fortunes for a few more seconds to study your lovely face, it falls to me now to get you out of the city and back to your people." Shrill noises in the wide street outside the alley caught their attention. Men were screaming and shouting at each other as they ran by. The flying creature must have made a close pass and startled those seeking shelter in the street. "Weapons out," said Kaleb to them all. "Fangs out," added Teva, exchanging a nod with Grimwit. Then the strange league of beasts and humans, behind Glista and Freyland's drawn swords, stepped out into the open street to face the Stonerender guards lined up in front of the west gate. Teva and Grimwit followed close behind Glista, while Kaleb and Madge brought up the rear. Almost as soon as their small company had stepped out onto the stone road, Kaleb heard a strident voice shout, "There are the beasts, and the traitors with the Dellblood captive. Take them without mercy, men, but keep the pretty one alive as Verlisden's prize." Kaleb looked up to see 5 of the scouts posted by the gate, surging toward them with swords drawn. Freyland sounded a battle cry. Lifting his sword high above his head, he charged forward. The rest of the motley party echoed his cry, then raced after the old scout into the center of the street. When the city scouts and the fugitives had nearly collided, however, an ear-piercing noise rang out that stopped both parties in their tracks. The deafening shriek rattled the very stones under their feet. Suddenly, like forked lightning out of a cloudless sky, the massive dragon descended, landing a moment later on surprisingly light footfalls on the cobblestone street. The beast reared up to a height at least 2 stories above the cobblestone road and bellowed again. Kaleb and his friends nearly tripped over each other, trying to avoid colliding with the dragon's giant back legs and tail. Madge ran into Grimwit and stumbled backwards onto the hard road. After recovering his balance, Kaleb discovered to his dismay that he and the others were now separated from Freylin by the dragon's enormous body. The creature's massive haunches and tail obscured their view of the old scout, as well as their exit through the west gate.